I get a ton of questions all the time in my DMs, from emails from my website. I get so many questions all the time about the SPD-SX, but one of the most common things is, how do I play on stage and use the Roland SPD-SX to run backing tracks, but also play samples and also hear myself playing drums? How do I hear all of that in my in-ear monitors when I'm playing on stage? It can be really confusing because yes, the SPD-SX has a ton of different outputs and routing that you can do, but I'm going to walk you through today the thing that I think is my much preferred way of running self-monitoring when using the SPD-SX, really no matter what the situation is. And it kind of goes for any situation where I'm running click, not only ones that are running SPD-SX. So to make this video very easy, I think that the best way to do it is to get yourself a little outboard mixer. This is an old version of the Behringer. You know, Behringer starts with making like 1 or 2 channel mixers all the way up to, you know, M32s and whatever that has a ton of inputs and outputs. So this mixer by Behringer has 2 XLR inputs and then 2 line inputs that are actually like a left-right separate input, which is very helpful. And then it has several outputs, which is kind of, you know, one of the big things that, one of the big reasons I recommend this. It has, you know, 2 main outputs, headphone outputs, and an effects in, and that's 4 totally separate, totally independent outputs that you can use to your advantage. And the reason that I say you should go with something like this, because while the Roland does have 2 main outputs and then sub outputs and then headphone outputs and all this stuff, getting things outboard means that in the middle of a live show, you're not gonna have to go in and mess with, press this button and then find this pad and then control this thing or switch this output to this thing. Getting things outboard makes things much easier. So I would definitely recommend that if you're gonna be running SPD-SX a lot, you're gonna be using it for click track or you're gonna be using it for backing tracks, and also you're gonna be using it to sample stuff and trigger stuff live. I would just recommend give yourself the control and give, you know, front of house the control by getting an outboard mixer. And this, you can find these used for like 20 bucks, but you can buy one new, $60. It's gonna be worth the investment. First, let me break down how I would route things in the Roland SPD-SX that's gonna make your life easiest. So, and let's walk through a scenario where you're going to be running click track from your Roland, you're going to be running backing tracks from your Roland, and you're gonna be running samples from your Roland. Now you can make this as complicated as you want, but I'm gonna walk you through the easiest setup. And the way that I would do it is I would split out each of those things into their own output. So what I would do is I would go into the SPD-S, and for wherever you have click track wave files loaded on or your click track, I would pick what output you want those to go out of. And for this, let's just do sub output. So for all the samples, you would just select sub output. For all the wave samples of click tracks you've loaded on. And for the internal click track, you would go to menu, then you would go to, I believe it's system, click track, and then tab over to the output tab, and then I would select sub output. So now all of the click tracks you run, whether it's you're actually running the internal click track for time reference or you're running a sample you've loaded on for a click track, all of that is routed out the sub output. Great. Now, I would move on to your samples, and I would select every sample on your Roland that you load on. Doesn't really matter, it's however you want to route it, but for this, I would route all of your samples hard left and make sure that they're selected on the master output. So master output, pan them all left, and that's for your samples. And now, for your backing tracks, to get those separated from your samples, I would route those out the master output. The output they're selected to is the main output, but I would pan those all the way right. So you have your click tracks, internal, and all the ones, the wave files you've loaded on as click tracks, routed to the sub output. You have your samples, which are all going to the main output, but they're panned hard left. And then you have your backing tracks, which are all going to the main output, but they're all panned hard right. So now that you have everything with 1/4-inch cables going out the back of your Roland, you have a few different options. I'm gonna walk you through 2 of them. One is where you kind of rely on front of house to give you your mix, which front of house is whoever's running sound. So if there's a dedicated monitor board, or if it's front of house and they're sending it back no matter what, the first setup is going to be relying on them to give you what you need. The second is going to be you kind of making everything happen yourself and monitoring everything yourself. Which is going to be, smaller clubs that don't have a robust sound system where you're having to piece things together yourself. That's going to be your second option. The first option is kind of things are pretty legit. They've got a sound crew that's giving you monitors and everything. So for the first setup, what I would do is for click track, if you have to run that to front of house because everybody else in the band is going to get it, I would run it to front of house and let them send it back to you. But if you don't have to run a click to anybody else in the band and you're the only one that needs to hear click track, which is sometimes really common depending on what kind of setup, if you're the only one on in-ears, no one else is gonna need click track. So in the case where only you need click track, I would just run click track into either the first or second input on your board, or you can do the third or fourth. It doesn't really matter. I would just run the click track right to your board. Now you have, from this mixing console, you have click track right here available to you. I would run the tracks and the backing track 1/4 inch cable into DI direct boxes and then send those to front of house. And then front of house can then pass that around to everyone so everyone in the band can hear the samples you're playing and everyone in the band can hear all the backing tracks you're playing. And then from front of house, I would have them send me, if they have a floor wedge, but I want to be on in-ears, what I'll say a lot of times is, hey, instead of sending stuff to the wedge, can you give me an XLR cable that gives me a mix of what you guys are doing? So in that case, they'll run me an XLR cable. I can plug it into here. And now I have 2 channels taken up on this board. The first one is click track, and it's coming from myself from the SPDS, and it's going in here, and I can control click track and give myself more or less. And then the rest of my mix is controlled by front of house because they're giving me an XLR cable, and it goes into the second input. And now that also has, built into it, since it's coming from front of house, it has my pad and stuff. And then you're just talking to the front of house or monitor engineer and saying, hey, can I have more of this, less of this, whatever. Obviously, you have less control over this, but you do have click track, and you have total control over how much click track you get. So that's kind of the first setup I would do. So in the second setup, where you're doing pretty much everything yourself, if you can get an XLR line, an XLR mix from front of house, great. I would put that in channel 1. What I would do in the next case is I would run everything through my board before I send anything to front of house. So essentially, I would plug in click track into the second input on this. So what I would do with the samples that I'm triggering and the backing track, I would go 1/4 inch cable out of the back of the Roland, and I would plug one of them into channel 3 as the right input and one of them into channel 6 as the right input. So basically plugging both cables into separate channels on this mixer. And now what I would do is, for my own mix, I would plug in to the headphones jack, and then I would, control how much I want on the main faders. I would control how much I want of click versus the other pad stuff that I have. And then to get things to front of house, what I would do is I would go 1/4 inch out of the FX send. And you have separate control out of what comes out of the FX send with these red knobs on here. So essentially, if I need to send front of house only backing tracks and samples that I'm triggering, I can just turn up the FX send on those 2 channels. But I don't turn up the FX send on my own mix, and I don't turn up FX send on the mix that has click track, because I'm sending this stuff to front of house, and front of house, everyone in the audience is gonna hear it. So that's what I would do. I would take up all 4 channels of this, and I would run, if they have an XLR cable they can send me, I would run that to the first channel. I would run click track to myself in the second channel, and then I would run the 1/4 inch out of both mains to 2 separate channels. And then I have complete independent control of how I hear everything by the main gain knobs on this mixer. And then for whatever I need to run to front of house, what I would do is I would turn up the FX send and run a 1/4 inch out of the FX in to them. And then of course in both of these setups, I'm just plugging right into the headphones and I'm hearing the headphones. So those are just 2 ways to do it. There are a lot of ways that you can do this based on how you route stuff out of the SPD-SX and a ton of other variables. But I think having a standalone mixer that you can use, that you can kind of problem solve around things, is gonna make my life much easier than trying to do it just all out of the Roland. Because the Roland, well, yes, it is flexible and there are a lot of options. Like I said, you have to dig through menus to do it. There's a lot of setup, and on the gig, when you're kind of in the middle of something, if you need to change how you route, say the, pads for backing tracks or whatever, if there's an external way to do that, it's much easier to turn a knob. Like if someone says, I set up and I run the outputs like I just said, and then someone says, oh, hey, front of house needs less backing tracks from you, they're just too loud. Instead of having to go to every, if it was inside, if I was relying on the Roland to do that, or maybe they're all too quiet, whatever it is, having a knob to turn and just control all of the backing tracks because I've set up my tracks to be routed this way is a lot easier than having to go to each pad and turn them up or down or whatever. So put down in the comments, what is your favorite way of monitoring your Roland on the gig? If this isn't the way you do it, how do you do it? And hopefully you learned something for this. Go ahead and hit the like button if you like this video. Hit subscribe if you like this video. I come out with content all the time. And make sure that you go through. I have a lot of other Roland SPD-SX videos, so make sure that you dig back through, and I'm sure there's something else you can learn. And if not, put down in the comments what you're looking to learn, and hopefully I can get you a video on that topic. So thanks for watching. Thanks for stopping by, and see you again soon.